Last Christmas, I said 7 words that made my mother's face turn white and my golden child sister choke on her wine. For 28 years, I was the daughter my mom forgot to photograph, the one she introduced as "This is Sarah, she's fine," while spending 20 minutes bragging about Jessica's latest accomplishment. I was invisible until the moment I wasn't. We were sitting around the Christmas table, hem glazed to perfection, candles flickering, Bing Crosby playing softly in the background, when my sister looked at me with that pitying smile she'd perfected since childhood and said, "Still living in that tiny apartment, doing your little nursing thing?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look angry. I just set down my fork and said, as casually as if I were commenting on the weather, "Actually, I just bought the hospital." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the Christmas tree lights buzzing in the corner. If you want to know how the invisible daughter nobody believed in became the owner of a $47 million medical facility and what it cost my family when they finally had to see me, stay until the end. And if you stand for justice, just like we do, like and subscribe to the channel right now to keep pushing the message that every child needs to be heard. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 28 years old. And I learned I was invisible at 7 years old, standing in the doorway of our kitchen in suburban Minneapolis while my mother threw what looked like a wedding reception for my sister's 10th birthday. Jessica's party had a professional photographer, a catered lunch, and a bounce house that took up half our backyard. There were at least 30 kids there, all dressed up, and my mother wore this flowing dress like she was the mother of a bride. She kept hugging Jessica and saying how special she was, how she was going to do amazing things. I was wearing a stained t-shirt from Old Navy, standing at the edge of the yard with a paper plate, and nobody asked me to be in a single picture. When my own 7th birthday came 3 months later, we had a grocery store sheet cake on the kitchen counter and pizza from Little Caesars. My mom was on her phone half the time, texting about some parent-teacher conference for Jessica. When I asked if we could do something special, she patted my head absently and said, "Sarah, honey, you don't need all that fuss. You're my easy child. You'll always be fine. You'll always be fine." That phrase became the soundtrack of my childhood. It sounded like a compliment at first. What it actually meant was, "We don't have to try for you." What I didn't know then was that being the easy child was going to teach me something my perfect sister would never learn: how to survive completely alone. And that lesson would eventually make me richer than my mother could imagine. Jessica got piano lessons at $200 a month. I asked for art classes once, and my mom said we couldn't afford extras right now. 2 weeks later, Jessica started horseback riding lessons. When high school came, my mother fought to get Jessica into Breck School, this prestigious private academy where tuition cost more than a car. She wrote letters, made calls, even hired a consultant to polish Jessica's application. My sister got in with a partial scholarship, and my mom somehow scraped together the rest, $25,000 a year. I went to Roosevelt High, the public school with peeling linoleum and textbooks from 2003. Jessica needs the right environment for her potential, my mom explained when I asked why we were so different. "You're doing great where you are, Sarah. See? You're fine." My dad was a regional sales manager who traveled constantly. When he was home, he mostly deferred to my mom on everything. She made the decisions. She controlled the money. She decided Jessica was the investment, and I was the backup plan. By the time I was 14, I'd stopped asking for things. I got a job bussing tables at a Perkins restaurant near our house, working weekend shifts and pocketing tips in a shoebox under my bed. That shoebox eventually bought my first real winter coat, my graphing calculator for math class, and the $200 fee to take the SAT. At the dinner table, conversation orbited around Jessica, like she was the sun. Her volleyball tournaments, her GPA, her college prospects, the boy she was dating whose family had a lake house. My mother would light up, leaning forward, asking question after question. If I tried to mention something, a good grade, a project I was proud of, my mother's eyes would glaze over. She'd nod vaguely and say, "That's nice, honey," before turning immediately back to Jessica. "So, tell me more about the scholarship opportunity at Northwestern." I learned to stay quiet. I learned to make myself smaller. But staying small was also teaching me something crucial. While Jessica was learning that everything would be handed to her, I was learning that I could build anything myself. And the thing I was building in secret was going to blow their perfect little world apart. When college acceptances came, Jessica got into Northwestern with a decent financial aid package. My mother cried actual tears of joy, printed out the acceptance letter, and framed it. She threw another party, invited relatives, posted 17 times on Facebook about her brilliant daughter. I got into the University of Minnesota with a full academic scholarship to their nursing program. My mom glanced at the letter, said, "That's wonderful, Sarah," and asked if I could help her address invitations to Jessica's graduation party. When Jessica left for Northwestern, our mother drove the 8 hours to Evanston, spent 3 days helping her move in and decorate, took her shopping for dorm essentials. She came home with photos of Jessica in front of the Northwestern Arch, Jessica in her dorm room, Jessica at the student union. When I left for the University of Minnesota, 30 minutes from our house, my mom dropped me at the curb with 2 suitcases and a microfridge from Target. She hugged me quickly and said she had to run because she was helping Jessica set up her bank account remotely. I stood there on the sidewalk, watching her taillights disappear, and something in my chest finally went cold and quiet. Have you ever felt that way before? That sudden realization that you could never match up to a sibling? If you have, subscribe and join our family. That way our message gets pushed further and every child is treated equally. I lived in Territorial Hall, a cramped dorm that smelled like old carpet and microwaved ramen. My roommate was barely ever there, so mostly I had the tiny room to myself. I covered my half of the wall with a calendar and started marking off shifts. Because here's what nobody tells you about full-ride scholarships: they cover tuition, not life. I still needed money for books, food beyond the minimal meal plan, supplies, everything. So I worked. I picked up shifts at the university hospital as a patient care assistant, the entry-level job where you empty bedpans and change sheets and watch nurses do the real work. I'd go to class from 8 to 3, then work from 4 to midnight, then study until 2 a.m. My mother called once a week, and every single call was the same pattern. "How are you, Sarah?" "Good, good. You're managing okay?"
Great.
So, Jessica just got invited to this incredible networking event, and she needs a professional outfit, and I was thinking. She'd talk for 45 minutes about Jessica, her sorority, her internship prospects, her study abroad options. Then she'd wrap up with, "Anyway, I should let you go. Love you, honey. You're doing great." I'd hang up and sit in the dark in my dorm room, and I'd think. I could tell her I haven't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. I could tell her I'm exhausted. I could tell her I need help. But what would be the point? So instead, I started paying attention to something else. Something that would change everything. I started noticing that the hospital where I worked was completely broken. I saw everything from the ground floor. I watched nurses burn out because they were drowning in paperwork instead of patient care. I saw doctors frustrated with outdated systems. I heard families crying because nobody communicated clearly about their loved one's condition. And I noticed that the expensive electronic medical record system the hospital had just installed somehow made everything worse, not better. During my breaks, I'd sit in the staff lounge and listen to nurses vent. The system crashed constantly. Simple tasks took twice as long. Patient handoffs were getting missed because information lived in 6 different places. I started taking notes. By my sophomore year, I'd moved from patient care assistant to working as a unit clerk, the person who actually inputs all the data into these broken systems. I saw exactly where the problems were. And late at night, after my shifts, I started teaching myself basic database design from free YouTube videos and library books. I had an idea. What if there was a simpler system, designed by someone who actually understood the workflow? Something that put everything in one place, reduced clicks, flagged important changes automatically? I started building it on a second-hand laptop I'd bought with tip money. I called it CareLink, mostly because it sounded professional and the domain was available. The first version was ugly and basic, but it worked. I showed it to one of the nurses I liked, a woman named Patricia, who'd been doing this for 20 years. She pulled me aside after her shift. "Sarah, This is better than the garbage corporate system we paid $500,000 for. That conversation planted a seed that I didn't fully understand yet. But it was the moment I realized something that would eventually make me millions. Sometimes the people doing the grunt work understand the problem better than anyone in the boardroom. I spent the next 2 years refining CareLink while finishing my nursing degree. I graduated with my BSN at 22, passed my boards, and started working as a registered nurse in the ICU. The pay was decent, $62,000 a year, and I finally moved out of my tiny studio into a slightly less tiny one-bedroom. My mother called to congratulate me on graduating. The conversation lasted 4 minutes before she pivoted to Jessica's recent promotion at the consulting firm where she'd landed after Northwestern. I stopped trying to tell her about CareLink. The few times I'd mentioned I was working on a software project, her eyes had glazed over exactly the way they had when I was 14. But I kept building. I found a developer through Reddit who was willing to work for equity instead of cash. His name was Marcus, a guy who dropped out of a computer science PhD and was working at Best Buy while trying to break into tech. We met at a Caribou Coffee in Uptown, and I pitched him my idea. Hospital workflows are broken, I said, showing him my notes and wireframes. I'm a nurse. I know exactly what needs to happen, but I need someone who can actually build this properly. He looked through my documentation for 20 minutes, then looked up at me. When can we start? We built CareLink version 2.0 over 9 months, working nights and weekends. Marcus handled the technical architecture. I handled the clinical workflows and user design. We scraped together $3,000 to incorporate as an LLC. Then I did something that terrified me. I pitched CareLink to the nurse manager of my ICU unit and asked if we could pilot it with our team. She was skeptical but desperate. Our hospital's official system had gotten so bad that nurses were literally keeping paper backups because they didn't trust the electronic records. 1-month trial, she said. But if this screws up patient care, we're done. That 1-month trial was either going to prove I'd built something real or prove my mother had been right all along, that I was just the backup child with small ideas. I barely slept for 30 days straight. CareLink didn't just work. It transformed our unit. Medication errors dropped. Handoff time between shifts got cut in half. Nurses started finishing their documentation during their actual shifts instead of staying 2 hours late. Patient satisfaction scores went up because nurses had time to actually talk to families. Within 3 months, the hospital's director of nursing asked for a meeting. I walked into her office in my scrubs, expecting to get politely thanked and sent away. Instead, she slid a contract across the desk. "We want to license CareLink for the entire hospital," she said. "And I think you should talk to our parent health system. They operate 14 hospitals across Minnesota and Wisconsin." The licensing deal was $400,000 annually. The parent health system deal was potentially worth millions. I was 24 years old, working night shifts in the ICU, and I just signed a contract that would pay me more than my mother earned in a decade. I called her that night, hands shaking, wanting to share the news. "Mom, something incredible just happened with my software." "Oh, that's great, honey," she interrupted. "Listen, I can't talk long. Jessica just got engaged. Can you believe it? We're already looking at venues. This is going to be the wedding of the century." I sat there holding the phone, listening to her gush about centerpieces and invitation fonts, and I realized something that made my chest feel hollow. She was never going to see me. Not unless I forced her to. I hung up the phone and sat in my apartment, staring at the licensing contract on my coffee table. $400,000 a year. 14 hospitals interested. And my mother was talking about cake flavors. Something shifted in me that night. I stopped waiting for her approval and started building an empire she couldn't ignore. Over the next 18 months, CareLink exploded. The parent health system rolled us out across all 14 facilities. Then a hospital in Iowa heard about us. Then 2 in South Dakota. Then a massive health network in Chicago reached out. Marcus and I hired 4 developers. Then 10, then 20. We moved from my apartment into a real office in Northeast Minneapolis, the kind with exposed brick and a view of the river. We brought on a CFO who'd worked at Epic Systems, the giant in medical software. Revenue hit $8 million in year 2. I was working 100-hour weeks, but it was different from the exhaustion of my nursing shifts. This was building something that mattered. Every hospital that adopted CareLink reported better outcomes. Fewer errors. Happier nurses. Better patient care. And I was getting rich doing it. By 26, I'd paid off my student loans, all $31,000 of them, even though my scholarship had covered tuition. Those were the living expenses my mother never helped with. I bought a condo in the North Loop with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman. I still drove my beat-up Honda, still wore the same practical clothes, but my bank account had numbers in it that would have seemed fictional 3 years earlier. My mother never asked about CareLink. In our weekly calls, which I'd shortened to 15 minutes, she'd ask if work was going okay, and I'd say yes, and she'd immediately launch into Jessica updates. Jessica's wedding had been spectacular, apparently. Jessica and her husband bought a house in Edina. Jessica got promoted to senior consultant. Jessica was thinking about business school. "We're just so proud of her," my mother would say, voice glowing with warmth. "She's really making something of herself." And I'd sit there, silent, thinking about the $8 million company I'd built from scratch while working night shifts. I could have said something then, could have corrected her, but I was starting to realize something more satisfying than her approval. I was building toward a moment when the truth would be undeniable, and that moment was going to be worth the wait. Then came the call that changed everything. A private equity firm that specialized in healthcare technology wanted to meet. They'd been tracking CareLink's growth and were interested in strategic options, which is business speak for "we want to buy you." I flew to New York with Marcus and our CFO. We sat in a glass conference room on the 47th floor of a building in Midtown, and they made their pitch. They wanted to acquire CareLink, integrate it with their portfolio of healthcare companies, and scale it nationally. They had relationships with hospital networks across the country. They could take us from 40 hospitals to 400. The offer was $35 million. I was 27 years old. After taxes and splitting with Marcus and our early investors, I'd personally walk away with about $19 million. I sat there looking at the term sheet, doing math in my head. That was more money than my mother would earn in 5 lifetimes. More than she'd spent on Jessica's entire existence. More than anyone in my family had ever even conceptualized. But something felt wrong. "What happens to our team?" I asked. "We'd retain key personnel," the lead partner said smoothly, "though we'd likely restructure to align with our operational standards." "And the product roadmap?" "We'd optimize for maximum market penetration and revenue growth." Translation: they'd gut what made CareLink special, fire half my people, and turn it into another soulless corporate product. I looked at Marcus. He gave me a tiny headshake. I stood up. "Thank you for the offer, but we're not interested." Our CFO nearly had a stroke in the elevator on the way down. Turning down $35 million was either the smartest or stupidest thing I'd ever done. I was about to find out which. Because word was spreading that CareLink had refused a buyout, and that meant other players were about to come knocking. They did. Over the next 8 months, we fielded offers from 3 more companies, each one bigger than the last, each one wanting to absorb us into their empire and strip away everything that made us different. And then Healthbridge Medical Center reached out. Healthbridge was a struggling regional hospital in St. Paul, 15 minutes from where I grew up. It had been family-owned for 60 years, but the family was ready to sell. The facility was outdated, hemorrhaging money, and couldn't compete with the big hospital systems. They were going to shut down or sell to a corporate chain that would probably gut it for parts. The family's lawyer called me directly. "We've heard what you've built with CareLink. We've heard you actually care about patient outcomes, not just profit margins. Would you be interested in buying the hospital itself?" I met with them the next week. The hospital was a mess. Ancient equipment, outdated facilities, staff that looked exhausted and defeated. But the bones were good. The location was excellent. And I saw something nobody else did. I saw what it could become if someone actually invested in it properly. If someone put the staff first, updated the systems, and ran it like they gave a damn. "How much?" I asked. $47 million for the facility, equipment, and existing staff contracts. I had $19 million in liquid assets from various CareLink distributions. I'd need financing for the rest. I'd need to convince banks that a 28-year-old nurse-turned-software CEO could run an actual hospital. I spent 3 months building the business plan, securing financing, convincing a bank that I wasn't insane. I brought in hospital administrators who believed in the vision. I showed them how CareLink would give us an operational advantage no other hospital had. The bank approved the loan. In November, 1 month before Christmas, I signed the papers. I became the owner of Healthbridge Medical Center, the youngest hospital owner in Minnesota history, possibly the country. The local business journal ran a feature. From night shift nurse to healthcare CEO, the Sarah Mitchell story. I saw it before my mother did. I could have sent her the article, could have called and told her, but I didn't. Because after 28 years of being invisible, I wanted to watch her face when she finally had to see me. The invitation to Christmas dinner came via text from Jessica. Mom's doing her usual Christmas thing. You coming this year? Would be nice to have the whole family together. I stared at that text for a long time. I'd skipped the last 2 Christmases, claiming work obligations. Which wasn't a lie. I'd been building an empire. But really, I'd been avoiding the reminder of my own invisibility. This year felt different. I texted back, I'll be there. I didn't tell my therapist. Yes, I'd started therapy after the acquisition closed because $19 million doesn't fix childhood trauma, that I was going home. She would have asked me what I hoped to accomplish, whether I was seeking closure or revenge or validation. Honestly, I didn't know. I just knew I needed to sit at that table one more time. Needed to see if anything had changed, or if I had simply outgrown them so completely that their opinion no longer mattered. Christmas Eve, I drove to my mother's house in my new car, a modest Lexus, nothing flashy, and parked on the street I'd grown up on. The house looked smaller, shabbier. The paint was peeling. The lawn had brown patches. My mother answered the door in her apron, the same one she'd worn for 15 years. She hugged me quickly, perfunctorily. Sarah, you made it. You look so thin. Are you eating enough?
Come in.
Jessica and David are already here. No questions about my life, my work, where I'd been. Just straight into hostess mode. Jessica was in the living room, looking polished and perfect as always, her husband David beside her scrolling through his phone. She stood and hugged me, and I could smell her expensive perfume. Sarah, God, it's been forever. You're still at that hospital, doing your nursing thing. Not a hospital. The hospital. But I didn't correct her. Something like that, I said. My mother bustled around, setting the table, bringing out dishes. The whole time, she talked about Jessica and David's renovations, their vacation to Turks and Caicos, Jessica's possible promotion to principal at her consulting firm. I sat quietly, watching the old patterns play out. Jessica in the spotlight, my mother orbiting around her, me off to the side like furniture. We sat down to dinner. Ham, roasted vegetables, my mother's famous scalloped potatoes. Christmas music played from the Bluetooth speaker. Everything exactly as it had always been. My mother poured wine for Jessica and David. Poured herself a glass. Gestured vaguely at the water pitcher for me. Some things never changed. I could feel it building in my chest. 28 years of being overlooked, compressing into something hard and bright. I wasn't angry. I was just ready for them to finally see me. Jessica took a sip of her wine and turned to me with that smile, the one that looked kind but had an edge underneath. So, Sarah, you're still living in that tiny apartment in Minneapolis, right? Still doing your little nursing thing. She said little nursing thing the way you talk about a child's lemonade stand. My mother jumped in, trying to be supportive in her own oblivious way. Sarah's always been so dedicated to helping people. It's sweet, really. Not everyone needs to be ambitious. The table went quiet. Even David looked up from his phone. I set down my fork very carefully and looked at Jessica. Actually, I said, voice calm and level. I don't work as a nurse anymore. Oh. My mother perked up. Did you go back to school? Are you doing something else in healthcare? You could say that. Jessica laughed, that superior little laugh. What, did you become a nurse practitioner or something? That's great, Sarah. Good for you. I let the moment stretch. Let them sit in their assumptions. Then I said, as casually as if I were commenting on the weather, actually, I just bought the hospital. The silence was so complete I could hear the furnace kick on in the basement. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Jessica's wine glass paused midair. David finally looked up, confused.
What?
Jessica said. I bought Healthbridge Medical Center, I said. In St. Paul. Closed the deal last month. My mother's face had gone pale. Sarah, that's not funny. You can't just. Hospitals cost $47 million, I said. That's what I paid for it. Jessica set her wine glass down hard. You're lying. There's no way you have that kind of. I pulled out my phone, opened it to the Business Journal article, and slid it across the table. My mother grabbed it, hands shaking. I watched her eyes scan the headline, the photos of me at the hospital, the details about CareLink, the acquisition, my age.
How?
She whispered. When did you? I started building CareLink 6 years ago, I said. While I was working night shifts and you were helping Jessica pick out engagement venues. The software company I founded is now in over 100 hospitals. We did $23 million in revenue last year. I sold most of my equity for a substantial return, which I used to buy the hospital. Jessica snatched the phone, reading frantically. Her face was red, whether from embarrassment or anger. I couldn't tell. Why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, voice breaking. And there it was. The question I'd been waiting for. This was the moment. 28 years of being invisible, compressed into one perfect response. I'd rehearsed versions of this in therapy, in my car, lying awake at night. But now that it was here, the words came out simple and clear. Why didn't I tell you? I repeated. Mom, I tried. So many times. When I got into college with a full scholarship, you were addressing invitations to Jessica's party. When I started CareLink, you interrupted to talk about Jessica's internship. When I closed my first hospital contract, you were planning her wedding. My mother's eyes were filling with tears. That's not fair, Sarah. We always supported you.
No.
The word came out harder than I intended. You supported her. You invested everything into Jessica. Private school, college visits, seed money for her life. You gave me grocery store cakes and hand-me-downs and told me I'd be fine, like that meant you didn't have to try. I looked at Jessica, who was staring at her plate. You got every advantage, I said to her. Every opportunity, every safety net, every bit of their attention and resources. And you know what you did with it? You became the consultant. Which is fine. It's a good job. But Mom talks about you like you're running the world. I turned back to my mother. I built a software company that's improving patient care in over 100 hospitals. I bought and am now running an entire medical facility that employs 300 people. I did it with no money from you, no connections from you, no support from you. I did it while you forgot my birthday 3 times and never once asked me a real question about my life. My mother was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks.
Sarah, I'm sorry.
I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't look. You decided when I was a child that Jessica was worth investing in, and I wasn't. And now you're just shocked that your backup daughter turned out to be the one who actually built something. The table was silent except for my mother's quiet crying. I stood up, picked up my phone, and pushed my chair back in. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, I said, and I meant it. My voice was tired now, not angry. I'm telling you because I needed you to finally see me. Really see me. Not when I'm successful enough that you can't ignore it anymore, but I needed you to know what you missed. I walked out of that house into the cold December night. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, engine off, just breathing. My phone buzzed. My mother. Please come back. Let's talk about this. Then Jessica. That was really harsh, Sarah. Mom's devastated. I turned the phone off. The thing about finally being seen is that it doesn't feel the way you imagine. I'd fantasized about this moment for years. The vindication, the shock on their faces, the proof that they'd been wrong about me. But sitting in my car outside the house I'd grown up in, I mostly felt tired. And sad. Sad that it had taken $47 million for my mother to look at me. Sad that Jessica's first response was to defend the status quo rather than apologize. Sad that even now I wasn't sure anything would actually change. I drove back to Minneapolis and spent Christmas Day alone in my condo, looking out at the city lights. The fallout came in waves. And it was worse than I expected. Because my mother wasn't going to accept what happened quietly. She was going to try to rewrite history. 3 days after Christmas, my phone started blowing up. Relatives I barely knew were calling, texting, asking what had happened. My mother had told her version of the story to everyone. Her ungrateful daughter had humiliated her at Christmas dinner, thrown money in her face, and abandoned her family. She'd called me selfish, cruel, said I'd changed, that money had corrupted me. My aunt called, crying, begging me to apologize to my mother. She gave you everything, my aunt said. This is breaking her heart. I listened for a minute, then said quietly, ask her how much she spent on Jessica's education versus mine. Ask her if she can name a single important thing in my life from the past 5 years. Ask her when she last asked me a real question. My aunt went silent. That's what I thought, I said and hung up. Jessica sent a long email. It was half apology, half defensiveness. She acknowledged that maybe she'd gotten more attention growing up, but she hadn't asked for it. She said I was being unfair, bringing up the past like this. That mom had done her best. That I was lucky I'd been successful, but that didn't give me the right to hurt people. I read it 3 times and realized she still didn't get it. She thought this was about jealousy, about comparing accomplishments. She didn't understand that it was about being invisible for 28 years and finally refusing to accept it. I didn't respond. My mother sent letters. Long, handwritten pages about how she'd always loved me, how she was proud of me, how she wished I'd told her what I was building. She wanted to make things right. She wanted to be part of my life now. Now that I was worth noticing. I put the letters in a drawer and went to therapy. Here's what happened over the next year. Jessica's husband David got laid off. Their financial situation got tight. They had to sell the house in Edina and move to a smaller place. Jessica called me once, carefully, asking if I had any connections in healthcare consulting. I gave her 3 names. I didn't offer money. My mother's health declined. She developed heart problems, stress-related, her doctor said. She had to retire from her job as a school administrator. Money got tight for her too. She reached out multiple times, wanting to rebuild our relationship, wanting to be part of my success, now that she could see it. I met her for coffee once, for months after that Christmas. We sat in a Starbucks in Uptown and she cried and apologized and said all the things she should have said years ago. I listened. I told her I forgave her. And I meant it. But I also told her that forgiveness didn't mean going back to how things were. That I'd built a life without her in it, and I liked that life. That she could be part of my future, but only if she could accept me as I actually was, not as she decided I should be. She said she understood. I'm not sure she did. I poured my energy into HealthBridge. We updated equipment, improved staff training, integrated CareLink throughout the facility. Patient outcomes improved. Staff retention improved. Within 18 months, we were profitable and expanding. I hired a hospital administrator who'd been forced into early retirement by a corporate health system that didn't value her experience. I created a nursing scholarship fund for students from low-income families. I made sure every single person who worked for me felt seen. I started speaking at conferences about healthcare technology and hospital management. A journalist from Fortune did a profile. I used every platform to talk about what happens when you invest in people properly, when you build systems that actually work, when you care about outcomes over profit. And when people asked about my background, I told them the truth. I was the daughter nobody believed in. The one who was supposed to be fine. The one who learned to build everything herself because no one else would build it for her. So here's what I learned, and here's what I want you to hear if you're the invisible one in your family. Your worth is not determined by whether your parents see it. Your potential is not defined by who they chose to invest in. Being overlooked doesn't mean you're overlookable. Sometimes it means you're going to have to build your own light, and it's going to shine brighter than anyone expected. My mother calls occasionally now. The conversations are better, more honest. But they're also shorter, boundaried. I'm cordial with Jessica. We're not close, but we're not enemies. The truth is, I don't need them to clap for me anymore. I don't need their validation or their approval or their belated pride. What I needed was to prove to myself that I could build something that mattered, without anyone's help, without anyone believing in me first. And I did. I own a hospital. I run a software company. I employ hundreds of people. I change lives every single day. But more than any of that, I own myself. My time, my energy, my worth. That's what happens when you stop waiting for people to see you and start seeing yourself. If you're the forgotten child, the backup plan, the one they said would be fine, you don't need their permission to be extraordinary. You just need to stop asking for it. Build something they can't ignore. Not for revenge. Not for vindication. Build it because you deserve to live in a world where you're not invisible. And then, when they finally look up and notice, you get to decide if you even want them to see. That Christmas dinner was 2 years ago now. Last month, my mother sent me a photo. It was from my 7th birthday, the one with the grocery store cake, and I was standing at the edge of the frame, half cut off, watching Jessica blow out candles. She'd written on the back, "I'm sorry I didn't see you. I see you now." I put it in a frame in my office. Not because I needed her apology anymore, but because that little girl in the corner deserves to be remembered. She's the one who built all of this.